the observation that when mice were taking urolithin A and that they were improving their muscle strength and muscle endurance, they were able to run over 40% further than mice that weren't taking it. This was the revelation that caused us to think this could have a serious impact, a beneficial impact on humans.
Hello and welcome to the Live Long and Master Aging podcast. I'm Peter Bowes. This is where we explore the science and stories behind human longevity. Chris Rinsch is a co-founder and the CEO of Amazentis, the Swiss life science company behind Timeline, the nutritional supplement that's been shown to support mitochondrial function and muscle strength as we grow older. In this interview, we're going to take a closer look at how a product like this gets from the laboratory to your body, and what it's like as a researcher to embark on a scientific journey fueled by a desire to help people live longer, healthier lives. Chris Rinsch, welcome to the Live Long and Master Aging podcast.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me today.
Well, it's my pleasure, and thank you for your hospitality here. It's good to look at where Amazentis, your parent company, is based, and where you've been doing, at least in part doing, the research that goes back about 15 years now behind urolithin A and Timeline.
Well, Peter, yes, it's been 15 years that we've been working on this. We started out with this idea of really developing this next generation of nutrition that's scientifically based, that can really bring new benefits to people's health just on a daily basis. Ways of incorporating these types of nutrition into our daily habits that will improve our health and wellness and well-being throughout our lives. And so that was really how we started out.
Well, I want to learn more about how you started out and really dive into the process, because I'm interested in how companies like this develop and the research that you do, and really from an infrastructure perspective, what that actually involves to get from an idea, from a theory to a product on the market. Before we do that though, let's just talk a little bit about you and how you got into this. You're originally from California, that's where I live.
Yes, I'm from Los Angeles originally. Grew up there, moved to Switzerland where I did my PhD, and then while I was here, I got involved in the biotech industry. I got involved into the venture capital community where we were looking at actually nutrition and new ways of basically bringing more of an advanced nutrition to the market. And during that period, I had a chance to see a lot of science that was being performed in laboratories that wasn't really translating into humans, and it was staying at sort of the very early developmental stage. And at that point, also in looking at how the diseases of aging and the conditions that we all get as we get older, this idea behind how can we actually manage that aging process and manage it through nutrition and not through pharmaceuticals, and do this in a smart way that empowers each of us to basically incorporate that into our daily routine, into our foods that we take in the morning, or and even supplements. So different types of formats of products. So when we started the company, Amazentis, the idea was really to embark and try and develop this sort of Genentech of nutrition, where we would take all the tools that scientists use to create drugs and apply them to the foods that we're eating, and to identify compounds that were bioactive and that could bring specific benefits for our health.
And what was it about the state of science then, some 15 years ago, that made you confident, if indeed you were confident, that there was a positive end game here? That you just described the vision, but there must have been something that you'd observed, whether it was anecdotal evidence or the state of science at the time, that enthused you to pursue this and to the point where you are now, where you have several products?
For sure, Peter. So, the idea at that time, what I had been observing is that you had phytochemists on one corner who were trying to dissect out all of the compounds that were found in plants, and then who didn't have the biology, the basic biology skills, but more the sort of the phytochemical skills. And then you had the academic researchers in the life sciences who were developing new drugs, testing out antibodies, gene therapy, et cetera. And there wasn't too much of a communication between the two at the time. It was very early in this idea of foods that could be really functional and have an advanced function. Of course, that's evolved a lot in the last 15 years. And so we saw the opportunity. We saw that as there were publications on different foods that were showing, for example, if you administer pomegranate juice to mice, that they were showing some type of antioxidants or whatnot. But the very sort of, I would say, premature studies. And there were studies, I recall, even with blueberries at the time, where they were looking at feeding blueberry extracts to mice and showing improvement in cognitive health. And at the time, it was there wasn't a deep dive into what was really driving those health benefits. It was more almost a theory that it was the combination or this aggregation of different compounds, phytochemical compounds found in these foods that we're eating, that were making and providing these health benefits. And so we wanted to explore this further and do a deeper dive.
So you've mentioned phytochemicals a few times, and of course this isn't the first interview that I've done about urolithin. Several of the independent scientists on the podcast, as well as people directly involved in Timeline and Amazentis, and we've explained this and we've explained the science several times. But phytochemicals, it might be just worth it at the beginning of this interview if you could just explain what they are, where they come from, and why they are important for human nutrition.
Sure. So the phytochemicals are the compounds that are basically made in plants, and you find them in whether they're in leaves or the flesh of a fruit. If you think about the pomegranate, as I guess we'll be talking a little bit about the pomegranate today, it's they're compounds that are distinct from vitamins and minerals, and they're compounds that are that can be distinct to certain plants, and they can be also produced in many plants. And one of the phytochemicals that is found in the pomegranate that, and we'll be speaking about a little bit, is the elagitanin family, and that's found in pomegranates, is found in different types of nuts and other berries. And so these are compounds that we don't really think about as consumers. We often, in the case of the elagitanins, we sense them as a difference in taste and maybe a more of a bitter taste, but we don't think of them for their health benefits.
Anecdotally, of course, for many, many years, pomegranates have been known to be good for our health, and to a greater or lesser extent, people around the world have been consuming them for a very long time. But when was it that you first realized that there was something perhaps more special about pomegranates than we'd first realized?
Well, it was, we started the company back in 2007, and we were looking at a number of different natural products, and pomegranates was one of them. And what was attractive about pomegranates, it was that there were a number of scientists that are starting to explore what type of health benefits. And so there was a feeling that there could be something in terms of a real health benefit linked to pomegranates. But it was, at the time, it was for us a question: is this marketing, or is this something that's real? And so it was one of a number of natural products that we were looking at, and we decided to take a deep dive on.
And what was the first stage? And I'm talking in terms of getting the infrastructure, getting the relationships, getting the partnerships up to speed with independent scientists that over the years you have continued to work with. Just making that first step, that first hurdle, going from a hunch, from an idea, from an aspiration, to, in practical terms, kickstarting the research.
Well, when we created the company, we had some initial financing, and we started to do some research, some basic research on the pomegranate, and this led to us getting some grants here in Switzerland, and we started working together with different scientists here at the EPFL, and also with other technical schools here in Switzerland, and the first stage was trying to, when it comes to the pomegranate, trying to understand, what are those different compounds, what are their abundance, and we were first, exploring the idea of an extract of the pomegranate that would be very controlled, having a certain quantities of specific phytochemicals, but also trying to understand, what could actually be among the dozens or hundreds of compounds that are produced by the pomegranate. Which ones would be, the most impactful?
And was it easy to identify others in the industry, in the business of research, who were doing or had similar ideas, who were like-minded in terms of aspirations, who could also benefit from the various collaborations that you've had?
At the time, I believe there's a number of companies or scientists that were interested in natural products and trying to push and understand what their benefits were. But it is different when you're in a company environment and you have a more of a focus to try and unlock and understand how things work and even if they work. And I think that's perhaps an important difference between academia and companies.
The thing that strikes me is that here we are now at the point where you have several products on the market, and this is the result of a decade and a half of research. And research by its very nature is expensive, especially when you're talking about clinical trials and the infrastructure that you and others need to make that a reality. The financial involvement, the umbrella financial involvement in all of that must be huge to even get to a point where you can begin to think about selling something to the consumer. And what's in my mind is a huge amount goes into this, and I'm getting that perspective from you, that these things don't just happen overnight.
Indeed, biology takes time to, research takes time, and it does require a certain quantity of investment. Research in the food side requires less investment than pharmaceuticals, and I think it's a different risk profile as well. But nevertheless, research in nutrition, if you're coming up with something innovative and new to the market, it does take years to develop, especially if you want to set the bar high and have something very scientifically driven. So at the beginning, we had and we still continue to have amazing investors who are very patient and share this long-term vision that we can make an impact on people's health by developing cutting-edge nutrition that's clinically validated and that we can incorporate into the various foods or as supplements. And so, at the early days, we also had a number, and over the years had a number of grants that facilitated interactions with the academia, and this started out. It was a stepwise process. We spoke about how we were and how we've been looking at pomegranates. We started out early looking at pomegranates, trying to understand from a science perspective what's inside of the pomegranate in terms of the phytochemicals, and it was this stepwise exploration that led us down the pathway, and that we've arrived today. And it was a very sort of funnel approach, diligent approach, where we looking one thing at a time.
And we'll continue with Chris in just a moment. But first, I'd like to thank Timeline Nutrition, the subject of this conversation, for supporting this episode of LLAMA, the Live Long and Master Aging podcast. Our guest is Chris Rinsch, a co-founder and CEO of the Swiss life science company Amazentis. Today, longevity, the word longevity, it's something of a buzzword. There's an atmosphere around it, there's an enthusiasm around all things longevity and health span, lifespan. That wasn't the case 15 years ago, was it? People wouldn't necessarily talk about human longevity, aspirations to live as long as we can with optimum health in the terms that they do now. How have you, and assuming that, I don't know whether you agree with that analysis, but how have you seen things change in this space, in this field, over those years?
Indeed. I mean, if you think about 15 years ago, there was, at that time, when we think about functional nutrition, there was less of a focus on the term longevity or health span, and it was more about, specific health benefits. And this is just a consequence of marketing, that there's certain, you need to focus your product on certain types of health benefits. And so there were products which are still out there today, like the Benecol, for example, that's lowering cholesterol with time if you take that, and then there's other products for immunity that with vitamins and minerals, but the whole idea of longevity and health span really emerged over the last 15 years, and while we didn't phrase it as longevity and health span at the time when we started the company, that was always our mission. How do we keep everybody? How can we develop products that basically improve people's health throughout their lives and keep them at their peak, no matter what stage of life they're in? And so, from the onset, we've been a company focused on longevity and health span.
And health span, I think, is the key word, and
Right.
It's one that I focus on all the time. And again, I think there is a growing understanding. I don't think it's mainstream yet in terms of the general public's understanding of what health span is, and every opportunity I try to explain it's about living for as long as possible with optimum health, the health that you enjoy as a child, as a young adult, and then we all experience growing old and our parents growing old and seeing what happens when you begin to get those diseases, sadly the killer diseases of old age. And health span is simply existing for as long as you can without getting to that turning point where things begin to go downhill. And for me it's quite a simple concept, but I think the challenge is certainly for people like you, and it's certainly one that I'm trying to address, is to not only explain the concept, but to explain how we can use various interventions in our lives, whether they happen to be nutraceutical, whether they are exercise, other aspects of diet, or just getting more hours sleep at night,
Sure.
to ultimately achieve that goal. Do you see it like that?
Yes, I think you need a holistic approach that integrates many different aspects, and whether that's changing your diet and eating healthy, and having that right mix of foods on your plate, to exercising on a regular basis, as well as sleeping well, and then of course then comes the functional nutrition piece, where you have products that are clinically evaluated, and where you've been able to show a clear effect, whether in our case we focused on mitochondrial function, and as a first sort of physiological outcome of improving mitochondrial function, we focused on its effect on skeletal muscle and basically performance and overall. I mean, and this is the way that we've entered into this, but we can speak more about the importance of mitochondrial function as we age. Yeah,
exactly. I'm curious. So once you got the company up and running, you were involved in the research. Is there a point? Was there a turning point? I was going to use the phrase "a big breakthrough," but was there a big breakthrough where that light bulb really shone and you could see, yes, there really is potential in the original ideas that we had?
Yes, in fact, there was a defining moment in the company, and that was, we had been looking at, we had been studying the pomegranate, looking at extracts, looking at the compounds inside of the pomegranate, and that led us to start looking at some of the metabolites or postbiotics that were originating from these compounds, and just to kind of give a brief explanation to that, when you consume certain phytochemicals, there are the gut bacteria inside of us will transform them into postbiotics, which are metabolites of these phytochemicals, and one of these metabolites that we looked at was called urolithin A, and so we had been studying the phytochemicals, these allagitannins, in fact, in particular punicalagin, which is the most abundant allagitannin found in the pomegranate. And at one point we thought, well, let's take a look at some of these metabolites or postbiotics that are emerging after we consume allagitannins. And at that time we started investigating urolithin A. We then started testing urolithin A in preclinical models in healthy mice, and we watched and monitored the effect on animal physiology, animal performance with time, and we were very surprised to see that there was this marked impact on the actual running of the mice, and they were running more than 40% more than mice that weren't taking our product. And I think this observation was an important one for us. Now, prior to that, if I just turn back the clock before, we were looking at cells, and we were seeing an effect on mitochondrial function in cells, and we were looking at C. elegans, and which is a standard model for aging that's used by the scientific community.
They're little worms.
Yeah, very small worms, and they have a very short lifespan of around 20 days. And what we showed, and this is in collaboration with Professor Johan Owerks, who is a professor here at the EPFL, what he showed in his lab was that by providing urolithin A to these worms, we extend their lifespan by around 45%, which was that was sort of the first step in the aha, because he hadn't seen other compounds that were creating or catalyzing such a benefit on the lifespan of these worms, and consequently the health span of the worms. And so that's what caused us to advance into studying them into mice. And so the observation that when mice were taking urolithin A and that they were improving their muscle strength and muscle endurance, they were able to run over 40% further than mice that weren't taking it. This was the revelation that caused us to think this could have a serious impact, beneficial impact on humans, because there wasn't anything, and there continues not to be any type of therapeutics that are having a specific effect on muscle function and muscle performance like this.
So the next stage, human clinical trials, and the point is often made when people outside of science listen to conversations like this, they'll say, well, it's okay, it works in mice, but what about human beings? Clearly mice, C. elegans are good longevity models for the reasons you've explained, but it's not the same as proving that it works in you and I.
Sure, and so that's of course going from a mouse to a human. That's a large step in terms of in terms of research and development. You have to go through a certain number of safety steps, and so we went through all of these. We had to go through all of these steps of showing the safety of urolithin A. Of course, people have been taking pomegranates for thousands of years, and so the safety of urolithin A is a given. But coming up with a product and really trying to understand, how the effects seen in animals translate into humans, that was a big step. And so we went through all of the typical procedures of demonstrating this safety, and we ran a first study in humans for 28 days, and we looked at different doses to try and understand, how bioavailable, what are the levels that are needed to actually have a potential impact at the cellular level in humans after consuming this regularly on a daily basis.
Could you just talk us through the process of analysing a product for safety and the approvals globally that are involved in that, and the involvement of the FDA? Because I think it's, again, from a consumer perspective, it's a very blurry area when you consider a lot of the products that are on the market today. In terms of safety, can I trust this particular product? Who is saying it's safe? Is it the company producing it? Is it some government-funded body that's saying it's safe? Is it a combination of both? And what allows you to sell it? How does it work?
Good questions, Peter. So if you're thinking about commercializing a new product, a new active ingredient that's never been sold and put into foods before, there are certain requirements, and they vary from jurisdiction. But for the U.S., the standard is GRAS, or generally regarded as safe, and basically you need to put together a whole safety dossier that contains all kinds of tests that you've shown that the product has been safe, and the FDA basically determines whether or not you have made the right conclusion that the product is safe. And there are a number of standard tests that the FDA requires to have in this type of filing. So we went through that whole process and met with the FDA, and the FDA, and now it's considered an FDA GRAS ingredient for foods.
Is it? I mean, it sounds a complicated process. Is it easy to navigate all of that?
I would say that there is a certain amount of complexity to it, and it's good that there's a certain amount of complexity, because we want to be sure that the products that make it through this GRAS process with the FDA are in fact safe and can be used into foods, because in fact that allows you to incorporate the product and the active into foods as specified in your filing.
So once you got to the point, you've gone through all of this, to the point of launching a product on the market, a new process for you after so many years of research and development. How was that? How did you navigate that stage in your progress and the company's development?
Well, it was an interesting time because we were ready to launch we were planning for a launch in 2020, and this is right when COVID hit. And so we were building up a whole team in the US and doing this all remotely because we couldn't fly there at the time. And so it was a very interesting chapter in the company's life. But it surprisingly putting together the team went quite well. We have a great group over there, and and we started commercializing in the middle of the year, sort of introducing it into the market, and and now over the last couple of years, it's been really growing.
And as I mentioned earlier, we've done lots of interviews with your collaborators, and if you go into the search engine of this platform, you can find those interviews and learn a lot more about the minutiae of the product as you've developed it. I'm wondering, at that stage, and once the product is on the market, what you can then and now potentially glean is the anecdotal evidence of people around the world who are actually using the product, which something en masse in terms of big data you haven't had before, because it's simply impossible to get that kind of feedback. So what was the initial feedback? What has the feedback been like over the last couple of years, and what have you learned that's helped you?
Lots of interesting points that you raise, Peter, that as you know, we've been consistently running clinical trials. So I think that's something important for your audience to understand, that when we started, we ran a first clinical study, and then we ran 2 more clinical studies, one in individuals who are 40 to 65 years old, and we were looking at muscle function. This was after a period of 4 months, and we showed an improvement in muscle strength. We showed other improvements in VO2 peak, and then we ran another study in individuals who were over 65, and then we showed an improvement after 2 months there in endurance, and now we've continued to run other studies. In fact, we're expanding that into studies even in immunology, and What's fascinating is now, as you mentioned, we have thousands of customers, and they give us feedback, and the feedback tends to be very consistent with what we've seen in our clinical studies. One, there's a lot of feedback on energy. So this idea that you have more energy, your mitochondria are your power plants, batteries, whatever analogy you want to use of your cells, and so they're very important to making sure that your cells are functioning at an optimal place. And what we hear from people is that, in fact, they have more energy. People speak about, these are all anecdotal, and you have to rely on the clinical studies, but people speak about having more energy even when they come back from work and are able to spend more time with their kids riding bikes and things like as simple as that. Then you have people who are very focused on what they do, and they're maybe cyclists, and they say, well, I was consistently at the center of the peloton, and now I'm starting to be more in the front. And we've even had some people who have sent us notes over the weeks and saying, I feel more improvement. I'm seeing more improvement on my times, and which is interesting to see.
Well, it's interesting that we have the technology now on our wrists, on the bands, on the straps that we attach to ourselves during exercise, to essentially operate as one-person guinea pigs.
Sure.
And it isn't scientific. There's no control. We're an N=1.
Yes.
But it's more valuable because we have this technology now than even just 5 years ago.
Sure.
Certainly 10 years ago. That we and it's, for some of us, it doesn't interest everyone, but those of us that are geeky like this and kind of into it, it is interesting, isn't it? And possible to see the graphs and to see how we're changing, and to look at that information alongside our own personal anecdotal evidence, which is really just how you feel. Sure. And that must be helpful to you, that people can do that.
It's great, and in fact, your question, reminds me of one of our customers who, and this was about almost a year ago, who sent us a message and a picture of himself with our product on the top of Mount Everest. And
well, we talked to him.
Yeah.
I spoke to him on the podcast.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And so this was something where we had never expected this. We hadn't been in contact with him, and and he was very diligent about monitoring all of his different physiological parameters as he was training, and he seemed convinced that taking Mitopure and our product was key to maximizing all of his his potential there.
Yeah, I remember the interview. He was very excited about it. And I suppose before we get over-excited about this kind of evidence, we've got to remember that this isn't information data that you can put into a scientific paper, because it just doesn't stand up. Sure. And it's still fascinating to me, if I recount my own personal experience, I've been using Mitopure since it went on the market. Sure. And I'm instinctively quite skeptical about everything, and can't talk about any quick changes, any immediate changes. But if I look at my certainly energy levels today, even compared to just 3 years ago, or maybe 10 years ago, living roughly the same kind of life, so that's rushing around a lot, doing a lot, traveling, it's decisively higher now than it's been for the last decade or so. Now, whether that's because my urolithin A situation is better now than before, I don't really know, and I can't say as an individual, because during that time I might have changed my exercise regime, I might be eating less meat and I'm more on a plant-based diet. There are other factors that go into my lifestyle. So it's interesting, but not conclusive. And of course that's where the science comes in. That's where the rigorous science comes in.
Yeah, and that's why it's an excellent point. So this is why double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled studies are essential, and that's where we need to put the bar for all of these nutritional studies. And we need to run multiple studies. We need to and we need to show sort of an ensemble of evidence that points us in the direction of the benefits that the product can bring to us. Yeah, I mean, I have my own experience with the product. I also feel more energy. It's been now more than 2 years that I've stopped drinking coffee on a regular basis, and I don't feel like I have less energy because of it.
I recently stopped drinking coffee, but I don't intend to never drink coffee again. In fact, I've been drinking coffee today with your team here. Yeah. But I stopped drinking coffee, and I have several times over the last decade or so for a short period of time for whatever reason, and have learned that it's quite difficult unless you do it gradually. If you do it gradually, you don't suffer the fatigue and the headaches that some people talk about. But what I've learned is that being caffeine-free creates a relaxation, a sort of zen-like feeling that you didn't have before. I never thought I was particularly highly strung or that my state of mind was spiking because of the coffee, but I do feel a certain relaxation not drinking coffee. I think sleep is easier. That said, and we'll go into a tangent here that I don't want to go down, but I think there's evidence also that coffee can be quite good for you. Good data that shows that a couple of cups of coffee a day medically can be actually quite beneficial. And I also like coffee. I think it's great. So when you gave up coffee, was there a reason? Was there an impetus to do it?
Well, it was something that I had been considering over a number of years, but when I had tried to stop drinking coffee, I just, as you said, I didn't feel that same energy level, and so I inevitably went back to having coffee on a regular basis. Now, I'm not saying that I won't drink coffee ever again in my life, and I may have a glass of coffee from time to time if I go on a long drive or something. But in general, I find this more, as you said, zen-like feeling without coffee.
Yeah, it's fascinating and quite striking, that feeling. So moving on, you now have several products on the market, including very recently a topical application for urolithin A. Just talk me through the research process and the development process that led to that, and obviously the reasons behind it.
Sure. Well, we we started with the nutrition products. The first product that we introduced was it was a berry flavored stick pack powder that you could mix into yogurts and smoothies, and we still sell that. And the reason why we started with that is because we wanted people to have a real experience, a functional food experience. It had always been for us important that we were developing products that you could integrate into your diet, into your lifestyle, and into your morning routine. And so having a powder would give that flexibility to mix it into a number of different products. And so we began there, and then with time we introduced more of a typical supplement format, which is a soft gel. And this was welcomed by people, and of course it's convenient also to have soft gels. I know you mentioned to me this morning that you travel with the berry stick packs, and those are also very convenient. And then after that, we started hearing from athletes and this idea of, I'm taking protein on a regular basis. I'd like to, it'd be great to have a product that would have protein in it as well. And so we developed our first product that contained Mitopure and protein as a protein shake for people who are, finishing up from exercise, whether it's the gym or other types of trainings that they might be doing, and then
and at the moment that's a whey protein.
Yes, this is a whey protein.
Right.
Yes.
Have you thought of doing a version that would appeal to those people on plant-based diets?
Well, yes. So the product that we have today is a whey-based protein, and we're continually trying to innovate our products, and so something that's more targeting a vegan community that would look for and be interested in other types of protein sources could certainly be in our pipeline in the future.
Interesting. So we digress from the topical
yes.
application.
Yeah. So we've actually been thinking about topical for a while. So we've introduced a range of topical products earlier this year, and this is sort of a format of a day cream, a serum, and a night cream that all contain Mitopure. And the reason why we explored this is we thought, this is, as we think about health span and longevity and aging in general, it's not only, our muscles and all of the tissues of the body, but our skin is what we see first. And our skin is the largest organ of our body, and it gets attacked from the sort of the normal aging process, but also is bombarded by all of these, let's call it extrinsic aging factors, whether it's UV light or pollution, and so that accelerates that whole process of aging. And you can see that in people who have been exposed to a lot of, have been smokers, lifelong smokers, or who have been also spending most of their time outside versus those people who spend their time inside. And so we thought it would be interesting to explore this a little bit more. And so probably about 2 years ago, we embarked on this journey, and we started developing products that contain urolithin A in them for topical applications. And we've run a number of several clinical studies on that, showing benefits for basically skin health. I mean, and we think this is a very exciting area.
So as we conclude this, just a final thought about how you see the future. And I'm wondering if you agree with me that we still seem to be, the whole area of exploiting plants, of understanding the power of the components of plants and how they can apply to human health and longevity, that whole area of science is still in its infancy, and there's a long way to go. So how do you see the years ahead?
Well, for us, we are creating a company that's really focused on longevity and health span, and so the idea of going beyond just a single product that contains Mitopure, but to multiple products that are addressing different health areas that we need to think about as we get older, will be the direction that our company evolves. And one thing that's certainly important is, I mean, fundamental to all of the different health benefit areas is mitochondrial function. And there are certainly other phytochemicals that, that are very interesting and have some compelling science around them that could then be added for each of these health benefit areas that, we are thinking about as we get older.
And you mentioned the holistic approach, that it isn't just one thing, it isn't just one aspect of our lifestyle. Just in closing, give me an idea of holistically how you live your life you're clearly interested and fascinated by longevity as I am. How do you live your life, full picture, with your longevity in mind?
Well, certainly it starts with taking our product, Mitopure, every day. I think it's key to have sort of that as a foundation. But diet, a very healthy diet is key, and moderating what you eat so as not to go, overboard, and regular exercise, whether that's walking regularly, going to the gym, or running. I tend to do more running and hiking and walking, and just keeping active. I think that's important, and the combination of good diet, keeping active, and taking supplements that are targeting your mitochondria. I think that's at least for me, the holistic approach that I use.
Well, Chris, I think the work that you're doing and its potential is fascinating. Really good to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Peter, for having me.